So I do want to notice everyone that we are recording this session so that we can post the recording of the workshop to the project website for others who weren't able to attend. So with that, I want to welcome you to the Meeks Bay Restoration Project virtual public workshop. My name is Austin McNerney, and I'm a facilitator with the California State University Sacramento campus. Joining me today, we have Rebecca Creeman with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, Ashley Cyber with the U.S. Forest Service Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit, and Adam Lewandowski with the project's consulting team, Ascent Environmental. On behalf of the project team, thank you for joining us today to learn about the project and the recently published draft environmental review document. Since this project was initiated, there has been extensive public involvement, and the team is excited to receive public input on the environmental document during the official public comment period, which began June 10th and closes August 9th. We will be entertaining questions after the presentation today, about midway through the slides, and then again at the end of the presentation after Ashley speaks about how to formally comment. So there's plenty of time to talk about the project today. With that, if we can go to the next slide. I want to expand a little bit on how you will be able to raise questions today. First, we'll be using a question and answer polling platform for live or remote meetings. This will allow us to have more of an engaging and interactive back and forth, somewhat like a two-way discussion. The next few slides will show us all how to access the Q&A functions. The way in which we will be able to enter questions or comments depends on how you are joining us. If you're on a computer, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You should see a button there as shown here on the slide. If you're joining us from a phone, you will need to click the More button to access the Q&A button. So it depends on your device, which platform you're on. Please take a second and locate the Q&A button. Go to the next slide, please. Towards the end of the workshop, we'll have a discussion period where we will first respond to your questions or comments that were submitted throughout the presentation in the Q&A dialog box. And then we will turn to those of you who raise their hand and want to speak. If you're using Zoom on your computer, mobile, or other smart device, look for the raise hand button at the bottom of the screen to let us know that you would like to speak. When it is your turn, you'll receive a notification so you can select unmute yourself, at which point you will be able to begin speaking. The host will mute your microphone when you are done speaking. Next slide, please. Anyone calling into the meeting via phone is muted by default. During the Q&A period, we will set aside time for those who are on the phone to leave a verbal comment or question. You'll be given a little heads up so you can prepare. And of course, if you raise your hand, be ready to be called upon, and we'll take people in the order of which they've raised their hand. We will also address the written comments and questions in the chat box in the order that they've come up. When it is time for a verbal comment, you can press *9 on your phone to indicate you would like to speak. Listen for the message. The host would like you to unmute your microphone. You can then press *6 to unmute. When you're done with your comment, please press *6 to remute. Give you a second, read those. That's great. Okay, workshop agenda. So before we dive in, I want to explain what we're going to cover this evening. As you can see, the presenters will explain how this project came about and what the project's purpose and need are. The various alternatives will be explained, and we will respond to questions before explaining the environmental document structure and the key findings of the review of the alternatives. Lastly, we will detail how to effectively comment on the environmental document. I want to stress that this workshop is not an opportunity to provide formal comments into the record on the draft document. The workshop is intended to educate and inform all of you in order for those of you who want to submit formal comments during the review period, which, as I said, closes August 9th. At the end of the presentation, we'll address specifically how to get those comments submitted. Now, I'd like to pass the presentation to Rebecca with Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, who will provide background and more detail on the proposed project. So next slide.
Thank you, Austin. Next slide. All right, so for those of you who are not familiar with Meeks Bay, it's located on the west shore of Lake Tahoe, just south of Sugar Pine Point State Park and north of Emerald Bay. And this popular recreation area is managed by the U.S. Forest Service and includes campgrounds and beaches, a snack shack and rental cabins, as well as the marina that last operated in 2015. Hikers can access the Desolation Wilderness through the trailhead at Meeks Bay through Meeks Meadow. So the planning for this restoration project is a partnership between the U.S. Forest Service, TRPA, and the Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board. And I'm sorry to say that our partner, Brian Judge, cannot attend today. He would like to be here, but he had a family emergency. So he's part of our project team, and he has been a key partner in this project. And so our role as TRPA is really managing this environmental document and the public engagement piece for this project. And the agency team has been working with the stakeholder group to identify issues and concerns throughout the process. And this group has helped inform the alternatives you'll learn about today and identify areas of focus for the environmental analysis. And that stakeholder group includes some folks who are here today, including representatives from the Washoe Tribe, Property Owners Association, Marina Associations, the League to Save Lake Tahoe, Friends of the West Shore, and the Meeks Bay Fire District. We're also coordinating with the California Department of Transportation, who are supportive of the bridge replacement, which is necessary to accommodate the restoration of the creek. Next slide. So we've just begun the public comment period on the environmental document. And so we'll have 60 days, and that began about a week ago, and we'll have the comment period open until early August, to August, I think it's 9th. So you'll be able to have plenty of time, hopefully, to read that document, which I know it's a lot of information. So we're hoping that today we'll be able to orient you so that you'll be better prepared to actually comment on that document. And then we do anticipate finalizing that document this winter, and then taking into account any changes that we hear are necessary improvements to that analysis. And then we'll be taking it to the TRPA Governing Board, the Lahontan Water Board, as well as to the Forest Service to consider adopting this project or approving it. Next slide. So the restoration and recreation improvements planned at Meeks Bay are part of a bigger vision for sustainable recreation and a resilient ecosystem on the west shore of Lake Tahoe. Additionally, Meeks Bay is one of those recreation hotspots on the west shore that would benefit from strategies identified in the State Route 89 Corridor Management Plan. And some of those strategies include improved transit, bicycle and pedestrian connections, and parking management. So we continue to coordinate with the planning team that's studying the feasibility of a trail that would connect Meeks Bay to the South Shore. And most recently, TRPA is working with emergency response providers, the counties, and the city of South Lake Tahoe to identify locations for centralized public safety facilities around the lake. And TRPA staff will present recommendations for siting those facilities later this summer or fall. So if you're interested in that, please tune into our governing board agendas, and we'll have an update on that process. And then lastly, any recreation and shoreline infrastructure improvements that happen within the shoreline of Lake Tahoe would need to comply with the Lake Tahoe Shoreline Plan. And with that background, I'll go ahead and pass the presentation to Ashley Cyber with the Forest Service.
Hi, everybody. I apologize if I'm a little bright here. I'm not used to working in the evening like this. I've got a little different sunlight going on here, but thank you, Rebecca. Again, my name is Ashley Cyber. I'm currently the acting ecosystem coordinator for the Lake Tahoe Basin Forest Service. In my regular day job, I am the landscape architect, recreation planner. And you can go to the next slide so we can talk about the purpose and need for this project. Some of you may have heard this before, but since there are some new folks to the project, we wanted to go through some of the reasons why this project was initiated in the first place. So for folks who are not familiar with the history of Meeks Bay, Meeks Creek formed a lagoon ecosystem, or I should say formed previously. And you can see in this photo here in the middle of the 1950s, you can see where Meeks Creek outlet into Lake Tahoe through the middle of the site there. In the 1960s, that area was dredged and a marina was put in, and you can see in the photo on the right there. And as a result of that, there were some pretty significant changes to the ecosystem, and in addition, sort of the ecosystem services that the site offers. And so the purpose of the project is really to bring the Meeks Creek, the stream channel, as well as the lagoon system to a more natural condition. We want to have some of these hydrologic processes be able to support a functioning ecosystem, excuse me. But at the same time, it's recognized that this site is an existing recreation site and there's an existing recreation opportunity there. So we want to make sure that this project is continuing to support sustainable recreation opportunities. We can go to the next slide, please. Sorry, I got things popping up on my screen here. So on the left picture here, you can see this is the highway bridge, the Highway 89 bridge that crosses Meeks Creek. And you can see the little duck with her ducklings there. She can get down, ducklings probably can't get back up. Same thing with the fish. They cannot get past that constriction there. And so it has caused a constriction for native fish to be able to get upstream in Meeks Creek. So there's a proposal to remove that constriction with the installation of a new bridge at Highway 89 and improve the fish passage through this corridor. We want to restore the degraded habitats in the lagoon ecosystem and the Berry Beach ecosystem. For anyone who's been to Taylor Creek or Talac Creek down in South Shore, that is a similar lagoon ecosystem to what Meeks Creek used to be. And the mouths of the creek are either the opening and the location of it, and even whether or not it's open is dependent upon lake levels, as well as snowpack in the creeks coming down. So there's a lot of things that influence when and where the mouth will breach, the mouth of the creek will breach into Lake Tahoe. So that's a variable system, very dynamic system. We also have two species that are of a special concern on the site, Tahoe yellowcrest, which is that little yellow plant in that picture there. This plant species is endemic to Lake Tahoe and lives exclusively on the beaches. And the location of the individual plants in any given year is influenced by lake level. And so these plants, of course, like to live on the beaches, which is where we like to occupy as well. But with the lagoon ecosystem, there is essentially increased habitat for this species because the lake level influences the level of water in the lagoon, and essentially the lagoon creates additional habitat for this species to grow. And in addition, the marina itself is second only to the Tahoe Keys in the vector for aquatic invasive species potential on the lake. And so it is both a source and a sink for these aquatic invasive species. And there's ongoing eradication efforts, and this project would essentially continue those efforts and then deal with anything that pops up after the restoration. You can go to the next slide. And like I mentioned, this project, a major purpose of this project is to maintain sustainable recreation. So we have this need to maintain the access to Lake Tahoe and National Forest System lands. We want to provide sustainable recreation opportunities that are consistent with a functioning ecosystem, and where we can enhance educational and interpretive opportunities. And the Meeks Bay area is a location that is of particular interest to the Washoe tribe of Nevada and California. And this particular location was a location where there was a summer camps, and there was a lot of ceremonial activities that occurred and gathering of traditional plants in the lagoon and in the Meeks Creek area. So this project is really looking to enhance those plant species as well as animal species that are of interest to the Washoe tribe, especially for their ceremonial activities. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to hand it off to Adam to discuss the alternatives that we developed for the project to address the purpose and need that we just talked through. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Ashley. And I'm Adam Lewandowski from Ascent Environmental, and I'll talk through the alternatives. And really over the last 2 years or so, we've been working with stakeholders. We've gathered a lot of input online and at 2 previous workshops like this. And we took all that information and developed 4 different alternatives for the project. And so these alternatives reflect different approaches that can be used to accomplish the project goals. And all of the alternatives are evaluated in the environmental document. They're treated equally and evaluated at the same level of detail. And so if we go to the next slide, I'll provide a quick overview of each of them. And to start with, I want to talk about the existing conditions. So this graphic here shows the features that are out there on the site right now. You can see the existing marina in the center there in the creek. The campgrounds on the north and south side are shown in the green. That grayish brown color are all of the existing parking areas, and the day use areas, where the picnic tables are shown in orange, and then the beach is in yellow. And so a continuation of these existing conditions is evaluated in the environmental document. We call that the no action alternative. And the impacts or the effects of just continuing on with the status quo under the no action alternative is evaluated along with all of the other alternatives. Next slide, please. So this diagram shows the conceptual restoration plan. And the approach to the restoration is the same in all of the alternatives. There would be some more design work that would happen after the completion of the environmental review to really refine the details of the restoration. But this shows all the proposed features. And so if you can see where the marina is proposed for removal, and that area would be regraded into that more natural lagoon and revegetated with native vegetation. The sheet pile that forms the kind of artificial channel between the marina and the lake would be removed, and the creek mouth would be restored to that natural barrier beach with the creek mouth moving around like Ashley described earlier. As you move up the creek channel up towards the highway, the lagoon would taper into a single creek channel like it does today, but that channel would be revegetated. It would be regraded to create a more natural bank and floodplain system with some targeted stabilization with wood and rock and native vegetation. But generally it would look like nobody was there after a few years. It's intended to look natural and to function naturally. The State Route 89 bridge would also be removed and replaced with a larger bridge that facilitates the restoration, allows for fish movement, and provides more hydrologic connectivity from the upper watershed down through the lagoon. There would also be a fish management structure that would be installed that could be managed to prevent non-native species from moving up into the upper watershed and would allow for the reestablishment of lahontan cutthroat trout and other native species. And then there'd be some other habitat enhancement features, things like nest and perch structures, and some protection around the populations of Tahoe yellowcrest. Next slide, please. And so in addition to the restoration being the same across the alternatives, there's also a number of other features that are really the same in all the different alternatives. And so each of the alternatives has a little bit different bike path alignments, but they all include a new multi-use bike path with a connection that would go through the project area and cross over the restored lagoon on a new trail bridge. And then all of the alternatives also include a bike path alignment that more or less runs parallel to State Route 89 through the project area to provide a quick connection for people that are really passing through. All of the alternatives also include some shoreline restoration on the very north end of the site. There are some concrete walls and rock gabions that you've probably seen if you've been out there recently. And so those would be removed and replaced with more natural shoreline protection, things like boulders and natural willow plantings. There would be paddlecraft storage facilities under all of the alternatives, a place where people can store their own paddlecraft for a week or for the season to have convenient access to it. There'd be a number of different interpretive features, including an interpretive trail around the restored creek and lagoon and other signs and educational information. There'd be some reconfiguration of the parking and the roadways and the day use areas under all of the alternatives, just to try to provide better access, reduce disturbance and compaction of the soil. And then under all of the alternatives, there would also be the opportunity for some of the existing campsites to be converted into alternative campsites, things like yurts, where there's a lot of demand for people that maybe want to go camping but don't have a tent and all the gear. So they could rent one of the yurts instead of one of the campsites. So those are the elements that are consistent across all the alternatives. Now I'll point out a few of the differences. And if we go to the next slide, there is a site plan for alternative 1. And so with alternative 1, it would include a approximately 300-foot long boating pier that's shown kind of in the middle of the north side or the resort side. And so that would allow for people that have launched their boats elsewhere on the lake to come up and to tie the boat up temporarily and to get out and enjoy Meeks Bay and then leave again on their boat. It wouldn't allow for people to keep their boats there long term. It would include one boat lift that would be used for an emergency services boat, a fire boat, but other people couldn't keep their boats on the pier long term. In addition to this pier, this alternative, one unique aspect is that it would relocate some of the lodges or those motel style cabins that are on the north end of the resort. Right now, they're right on the beach. And so those would be torn down. They'd be replaced with newer cabins that are a little further inland. It would keep the same capacity, the same number of rooms, but it would move them a little bit off the beach and allow for a little more beach restoration and opening up a little more beach for public use. This alternative would maintain about the existing capacity for parking, about the existing capacity for campsites, with maybe some increase, minor increase or decrease as the campgrounds may be reconfigured to improve privacy between the sites and to provide for better access. And then under alternative 1, the State Route 89 bridge, when it's replaced, it would be widened to allow for both the highway and a multi-use bike path on the same bridge. Next slide. So this is alternative 2. Instead of the 300-foot long boat pier that was in alternative 1, this alternative proposes a 100-foot long pedestrian pier. And so that's a pier that would not allow boats to access it, but it would be a facility people could get out on. They could walk out to access the lake, to get over the lake, to swim off of it. It provide an accessible way for people who may have mobility challenges to get out on the lake and to access it easily. Like alternative 1, alternative 2 would maintain about the same capacity for parking and for campgrounds with some minor reconfigurations, as well as some reconfigurations of the day use areas. This alternative would not relocate those lodges or motel style units on the north end. And it would include 2 separate trail bridges. So where alternative 1 had the widened highway bridge with both the highway and the bike path, this alternative would include a separate trail bridge next to the highway bridge. All right, next slide, please. And so this is alternative 3. It does not include a pier of any kind, but it does include a paddlecraft launch or a non-motorized boat launch down on the very southern end there. And this is a small facility, maybe 30 feet long at the most, that would be floating and could be moved up and down with lake level. And it's really just intended to provide an accessible launch point that can provide an access point for people of all different abilities to get out and launch their kayaks or paddle boards or whatever non-motorized craft they have. This alternative would also expand the campgrounds. So the northern campground and the resort side would be expanded by up to 10 additional campsites, and the campground on the south side would be expanded by up to 12 additional campsites. Another unique aspect of this alternative is that it would relocate the parking on the south end. And so it would move that back, between the campground and the highway to provide a little bit more buffer between the highway and the campground and provide easier access from the campground to the beach. It would have a drop-off area where the current parking is, right between the campground, the day use area, where people could drop off their equipment for the beach and then drive back and park further from the beach. And then with that relocated parking would also be expanded by adding about 14 parking spaces on the south side. And then like alternative 2, this would have the 2 separate trail bridges with one of them being parallel to the SR 89 or the State Route 89 bridge. All right, next slide. So we developed those 3 alternatives working closely with the stakeholder group. And then we took these out to get feedback. We vetted them during a previous public workshop, which hopefully many of you attended. We also had an interactive website where people could comment on the various different aspects of the alternative and let us know what they liked and didn't like. And so we took all that information, and there were lots of different viewpoints that we heard, but there were a few themes that kept coming up again and again in all of the comments. And so those are summarized here on the screen. There were some people that favored expanded recreational facilities, but most people really preferred to have no new development or very limited new development, including no piers and no expanded campground. There were also some comments that expressed concern about the loss of the marina, but there was almost universal support for the restoration. People saw the need for the restoration, saw the benefit of it for the most part. There was also a general desire to keep the project area, and in particular the south side of the project area, as a quiet destination for beach use, for swimming and paddling. And there was also an identified need to improve emergency response access to the lake, to provide better access for lake evacuations, as well as a potential mooring spot for a fireboat to respond to lake accidents or shoreline fires. So the planning team considered these themes and all of the feedback on those 3 alternatives, and we developed a preferred alternative for the project. Next slide, please. And so before we show the preferred alternative, I want to talk about what that is. And it's really the alternative that's intended to achieve the purpose and the need for the project while addressing the stakeholder and the public feedback where possible. This is the alternative that will be recommended by the lead agency staff for adoption. And that's because it's the alternative the planning team believes best achieves the project objectives, minimizes the negative impacts, and responds to the feedback that we've heard. Under CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, the agencies are required to identify a preferred alternative at the time that a draft environmental document is released. But all of the alternatives, including even the no action alternative, are viable alternatives. So the environmental document treats them all the same. And ultimately, it's up to the forest supervisor, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency Governing Board, and the Lahontan Water Board to select which alternative to approve. Next slide. So this graphic shows the preferred alternative. You can see this does not include a pier. And that's because, as I mentioned, there really wasn't a whole lot of support for a pier. There weren't really a whole lot of people that thought that would provide a huge benefit. And there were some concerns about the impacts of placing a new pier here. Concerns about the scenic impacts, about impacts with boat traffic coming in to what's currently a swimming area, concerns about boat noise. One of the other reasons the pier was considered was for that emergency lake access. But as Rebecca mentioned, emergency access to the lake is being addressed through a separate process. TRPA and the emergency service providers are working together to identify the ideal location for emergency access on the West Shore, and the pier at Meeks Bay is not needed to provide that access. This alternative also includes that paddlecraft launch that I described for alternative 3. And again, that's really to provide that accessible launch facility for paddlers of all abilities. It's not intended to prevent paddlecraft launching or access from other points, but just to make it more convenient for people that do find that facility helpful. The lodges or motel style cabins on the north end would be torn down just like in alternative 1, and they'd be rebuilt with cabins further inland to allow for more of the shoreline stabilization and restoration, and allow for more of that beach area to be open for public use. This preferred alternative would maintain approximately the same amount of camping with maybe some slight increases or decreases as things are reconfigured, and it would allow for that alternative camping for things like yurts to be put in place of some of the existing sites. There'd be some reconfiguration of the camping as well, just to improve privacy between sites and to improve access. This preferred alternative would also provide a little more parking capacity. It would leave the parking area on the south side where it is today, rather than moving it like in alternative 3. But it would expand it a little bit and add about 14 parking spaces. And then like alternative 1, this would include a widened bridge on State Route 89 that would include both the highway and the bike path, as well as the trail bridge a little further down that's included in all of the alternatives. So next slide, please. And I'll just provide a quick comparison of the alternatives here, and then we'll break for some questions and answer. But just as a kind of a reminder of what we just went through, the major differences in the alternatives really relate to whether there's a pier or an accessible paddlecraft launch, whether the existing lodges are relocated away from the lake, whether the campgrounds and parking are expanded, and the number of separate trail bridges. So that's a quick summary of the alternatives. If you go to the next slide, then we will open it up for questions and answers. And I'll turn it over to Austin to facilitate the Q&A session.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam. And I want to take a moment here to see if there are any questions on anything that's been presented so far. John and Renee Healy have had their hand up since the beginning, so I'd like to turn to them first. John and Renee, talking. Would you like to speak?
Do you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes, I was interested in each of the drawings. You had a bridge that was over the creek that was between the highway and the lake itself, closer down, and yet that wasn't mentioned in your presentation. And we have that, there's been a bridge or a way across for people to walk from the south to the north and vice versa. Up until the marina was closed, but since the 1920s. But what it is it's so much easier for families. We would always walk to the beach and have the families go to the beach if we wanted to go to the far side of the beach. And yet now to take children up on the highway and to go, it's ridiculous in a lot of ways. There's a lot of people that use the entire Meeks Bay, not just one side or the other. And going up onto the highway is, it causes us to want to drive instead. And then that causes more parking, more traffic, more everything. And so I think to consider replacing some form of access from one side to the other between the highway and the lake should be part of the plan.
Right. Thank you for that, Renee. Did one of the panelists want to address that question?
Yeah, I can address that, and that is included in all of the alternatives. So there would be a trail bridge or a walking bridge that would connect both the north side and the south side over the restored area, generally in the location of where the old bridge used to be years ago. But you're right, that is a feature that's consistent across all the alternatives and would allow people to walk from one side to the other without going up to the highway.
Oh, great, great.
So I apologize, Renee. It was probably just so small in the diagram there. It's hard to see on the screen.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to some of the other hands that are up. Tim Matheson.
Yes, thank you. Ashley answered my question, but I have a follow-up question. My question was why is the parking so close to the beach preferred over moving the parking closer to the highway? And Ashley did provide a response that it seemed like the major reason was cited was having easier access to vehicles for beach equipment. I was just wondering if there's a possibility of having a drop-off roundabout like you had shown in one of those, but have the parking closer to the highway. So it does still provide buffer to the campground and also provides more scenic enjoyment with the cars not being right there at the beach. So that's my question.
Would anyone like to address the parking?
Yeah, I can address that. And that's come up a few times. I think there are really trade-offs with whether the parking is relocated or not. If it is relocated further from the beach, I think you're right. It would be there'd be some benefits. You couldn't see the cars from the lake. It'd certainly be easier access for the campers to go from their campgrounds right out to the beach. The trade-off is it would make it less convenient for the day users on the beach because they'd have to drop things off and then drive back to park and then walk back, and they forgot something at the car. They've got to walk back and forth. And there are quite a few more day users on the beach than there are campers. So that was certainly a factor. And then the other consideration was that relocating the parking would require some more disturbance. It would require, just more excavation, more construction, more cost, more tree removal. So it's always more impactful to do more.
All right, thank you for your responses. I appreciate them.
Of course. I do want to notice that there are quite a few questions that have been typed in the Q&A chat box. And if you take a look there, you will see responses that the panelists have been providing. So some of those questions have been specific to the type of environmental analysis that's been undertaken. And that's what's the subject matter of the remainder of the presentation. So I won't bring those up at this point. They're more appropriate after we've heard about the environmental document. But before we jump to that, I want to make sure that the hands that are up are addressed. And if these are questions specific to the alternatives and the process that you have heard about, then we would love to hear them at this point. So with that, can we go to Clay Freeberg?
Here, try now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Unmute.
He can hear you.
Oh, okay. Thank you for
Say
the,
your name.
oh, I'm Roberta Freeberg, Clay's wife. We're here together.
Very good.
So I think I want to direct my question, I guess, to Adam. So removal of the motel units would fulfill the loss of visible mass mitigation requirement for the construction of a new pier. So why does alternative 4, the preferred alternative, include removal of these units if no pier is planned? Also, I would like the wording for alternative 4 to include not just no pier, but to say no boating pier and no pedestrian pier for clarity.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, the rationale for the removal of those motel style units or the lodges, you're right, it does provide an offset for the new visible mass, the new scenic impacts of the pier under alternative 1. But without a pier, it does provide just a scenic benefit. If you can get rid of the buildings that are right on the shore, push them back a little bit further, they're less visible, so it improves the scenery if you're looking at it from the lake. They're also, fairly old and dated buildings, and years ago the resort had prepared a master plan where they were looking at kind of what they envisioned long term, and that was one of the items they'd included, was relocating those because they're fairly old. The other reason is that they're right on the beach, and there's a concrete wall and holding them up essentially. And so by moving those further back, it also allows for the removal of that concrete wall and the regrading and restoration of that side of the beach and the shoreline to create a more natural shoreline, and hopefully also to open up a little bit more beach space right there for public use, with that restored shoreline where people can go out and sit on the beach there, where right now you have kind of the concrete wall going right down to the water.
Adam, if you wouldn't mind expanding, there's a question in the chat on the rock breakwater near the resort, and specifically, will that be changed at all? You were speaking on a similar area. Could you address that?
Yeah, so there is, and Ashley may want to chime in here as well, but there is a natural boulder breakwater that's a little further down if you're going from the cabins towards the Kellett house. It's kind of in between those two. And there's no plans to change that kind of boulder breakwater, but the rock gabion, where you've got all those rocks kind of in a little metal cage, and that structure would be removed and would be replaced with a more natural shoreline protection structure that would include boulders and native vegetation.
Ashley, did you want to weigh in? I saw you came off video. So.
Yeah, I think Adam answered that there, but that breakwater separates the Kellett beach from the rest of the beach. And in doing the restoration of that shore zone there may need to be some, moving around of some of those boulders and whatnot. But I don't see a need to have to remove, that sort of separator piece there. Because I think actually, it looks sort of natural, but I think actually it was constructed, that smaller one between the Kellett house and the rest of the area there. So maybe some small changes, but we don't see a need to have to completely remove it, because the folks who are staying at the Kellett house do like to have that little nice private beach there.
Okay, a couple other quick questions from the chat before we go to the rest of the hands that are up, and then I'd like to move into the rest of the presentation, because I believe it will answer some of the questions that have been posed, and then we'll have time at the end as well. We're planning to go until 7 p.m., so we do have time at the end. But the questions that might be able to be answered real quickly from the chat, is employee housing incorporated into any of the plans or alternatives?
So I can answer that one. Unfortunately, no, because we do need some more employee housing for the Forest Service. But in this particular project, it does not address employee housing. These are all guest accommodations that are being, changed up in this project here.
Okay.
And for folks, I don't know if you were referencing the Forest Service fire station there, but that also is basically just not included in this project here.
Okay. Another question, do any of the recommended alternatives, or does the recommended alternative include a paddlecraft launch facility? And if so, what does the infrastructure of the paddlecraft launch facility include?
So yes, the alternative 3 and the preferred alternative include a paddlecraft launch facility. In the environmental document, you'll see some photos of kind of representative facilities. The exact details of this one haven't been designed yet. That'll happen in the next stage, but generally it's a fairly small structure, 30 feet long at the max. That would be floating and could be moved, so it's not permanently anchored to the bed of the lake, but it can be moved up and down with lake levels. And essentially, it's just a platform that somebody can drag a kayak or a paddleboard out onto and launch out directly into the water, that provides accommodations for people in wheelchairs and people with other mobility challenges to get out there and to be able to launch their craft. But pretty small structure, like I said, maybe 30 feet long at the most.
Mhm. Okay, let's go back to John and Renee Healy with their hand up.
I must have not, I thought I had lower
Oh.
hand. I didn't
Oh.
have that hand up again. We were mostly talking about the people from Meeks Bay Vista to be sure to be able to get across to the entire Meeks Bay area.
Okay, thanks
Yeah.
for that comment.
Sorry about that.
No problem, no
I
problem.
don't know how to get, it says lower hand. but-
Okay, well, we'll take care of that for you. Thanks for being here. So another alternative design specific question from Q&A. Will the extension of the bike trail onto Highway 89 displace the parking along the east side of the highway? Ashley?
I can answer that one, and maybe Rebecca can jump in here. This project fits into the larger State Route 89 corridor management plan. This project here would not necessarily, the construction of the actual bike path might displace some of the parking, but this project would not, come along and say parking is not allowed on the highway. The larger corridor management plan has varying solutions for parking and transit in the corridor. And what we're proposing is, for example, to allow transit to go into the site, those kinds of things, so that this project fits into the larger Highway 89 corridor plan, but it is not proposing removal of any parking in this project. Like I said, as a result of the bike path along the highway, in some areas, there might not be enough space left, but wouldn't be a blanket ban.
Okay. Well, with that, no more hands up at this point. Why don't we go into the environmental document, and hopefully that addresses some of the other questions that were raised about what was analyzed.
Great, thanks, Austin. And I'll provide a short orientation just to help you navigate the environmental document and make it easier for you to find what you're interested in. So next slide, please. So we are, again, at the very beginning of the public review period. It goes until August 9th. So we're looking for written comments. After the public review period, we'll consider all those comments. We'll revise the environmental document if needed. We'll provide written responses to all the formal comments, and then develop a final environmental document that would be considered for approval. So the environmental document is available from the project website that you see on the screen there, along with lots of background information, as well as a link that you can click on, and it'll take you to a page where you can enter your written comments on the document. Those will be formal comments that'll go into the official record and be responded to in the final document. So we encourage everybody to go to the website, download the document, review it, and submit your comments. Next slide, please. So the environmental document contains the chapters that are listed here. The executive summary provides an overview of the document, and it includes a table that summarizes all the different environmental impacts that are evaluated. The introduction goes over the purpose and need, the objectives of the project. It describes the different agency roles and the purpose of the document. It summarizes the public and the stakeholder process, and describes topics that weren't evaluated in detail. The description of the proposed action and the alternatives includes a lot of detail on all those alternatives I just walked through. And then chapter 3, the environmental impacts and mitigation measures, is really the heart of the analysis. And I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about what's in that chapter. And then chapter 4 includes kind of various other specific topics that need to be addressed by the state, federal, or TRPA requirements, but it generally refers back to chapter 3 for the detailed analysis. And then there are a series of appendices that include detailed technical information. If you really wanted to dig into the details, that's all there. Next slide, please. So the environmental document addresses all the topics that are listed here on the screen. And so if you're interested in a certain topic, you don't need to start at the beginning of the document and just read cover to cover, but you can go to the individual section for the topic that you're interested in. And then within each of these topics, there are also multiple different impacts that are evaluated. So under the biological resources, there are different impacts related to different species. Under scenic quality, there are different impacts that look at the effect of the project on views from the lake versus views from the beach looking out of the lake versus views from the highway looking at the project site. So lots of layers of more detail as you get into each topic. Next slide, please. And so each of those topics in chapter 3, each of the resource areas that were on the previous screen includes a section with all of the different subsections that are listed here. They all include a regulatory setting section, and that summarizes the federal, regional, and state laws and requirements that apply to that topic area. There's also an environmental setting, and that describes the existing conditions related to that specific topic area. So the existing biological conditions or the existing scenic conditions. There's a short section on the methodology that describes how the analysis was conducted. And then there are also thresholds of significance. And these are the standards that if an impact exceeds them, it's considered a significant impact that requires some kind of mitigation, a change to the project or something else to offset that impact. And if the impact is below that threshold, then it's considered not significant. And then you have the actual environmental impacts and the mitigation measures. Again, that part of the analysis that goes through and includes a analysis of how the project and how each of the alternatives would affect each of those individual resources. Next slide, please. So that was an orientation to how to navigate the document. Now I want to highlight a couple of the key findings from the environmental analysis. And again, there are lots of topics, lots of different findings. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I want to focus just on a couple of things on those topics where the project would have a beneficial effect or those topics where there was a significant negative effect that couldn't really be mitigated. Next slide. So there's a number of benefits of the preferred alternative. And that's really to be expected. And this is a restoration project. It's intended to benefit the environment. And so the analysis found that it would have these numerous different benefits. It found that the preferred alternative would improve recreational access to the lake and within the site with the improvements to the trails, the pedestrian circulation, the parking and the day use facilities. It also found that the project would have long-term benefits to aquatic habitat and to fish movement, due to the restored creek and the lagoon and the replaced highway bridge. And it found it would improve water quality and soil conditions by restoring the creek, reducing motorized boating in the vicinity of the creek mouth, and reducing land coverage or pavement and compaction of the soil. The analysis also found that it would reduce boat noise in the project vicinity with the removal of the marina, and that the project would not only be consistent with plans, but it would actually implement some of the plans and some of the policies in the regional plan, as well as several different transportation plans by restoring the creek and providing new multi-use trail connections, things that are called for in those plans. Next slide, please. So those are some of the benefits. Now I'm going to talk about some of the negative impacts of the project. And the first one is related to motorized watercraft access. The restoration of the creek and lagoon really would require the removal of the marina. During the alternatives development process, we spent a lot of time looking at different approaches to try to keep some portion of the marina and then restore some portion of the lagoon, or even look at creating a small marina next to a restored lagoon. And after looking at different options, we determined it just wasn't feasible to maintain a marina in this location and to restore the creek and lagoon. So the environmental document does recognize that the marina is an important recreational resource for those people that moor their watercrafts there. And just to put it in perspective, the marina has about 119 slips when it's operational. That is when the facilities are all there and the lake level is high enough. And these slips account for about 6% of the moorings that are currently available to the general public for rent around the lake. And if we look at just the West Shore, this marina accounts for about 11% of the existing moorings that are available for rent to the general public on the West Shore. And so when we look at the impacts of this, there are really a couple different ways we can look at it. When we look at the long-term effect of removing this marina to watercraft access on the lake as a whole, it really isn't a significant impact. And that's because the Lake Tahoe Shoreline Plan caps the total number of moorings, slips and buoys that can be placed on the lake in perpetuity. And the environmental document includes a mitigation measure, a requirement that would ensure that these removed slips go back into the pool of potential moorings that can be constructed at marinas. So that's another way to say that any slips removed here from this marina could be rebuilt somewhere else on the lake at a marina where they'd be available to the public. So from a lake-wide perspective, removing the marina is not really a significant impact. But we can also look at this on a more local scale, just in terms of removing the marina's effect on the boaters on the West Shore. And even though the removal of these slips wouldn't decrease the total capacity for moorings on Lake Tahoe, it could have a localized effect as the slips in Meeks Bay are removed, and additional slips could be constructed elsewhere on the lake. There's really no way to guarantee that additional slips would be constructed on the West Shore near Meeks Bay. And so the environmental review took a conservative approach, and it called this localized impact significant because there's really no way to ensure that the moorings would be made, new moorings would be made available in the vicinity of the project. And so the environmental document calls this a significant and unavoidable impact. Next slide, please. The next impact really relates to the temporary construction noise, and specifically the noise generated with the bridge replacement. Demolishing and rebuilding the bridge would require some overnight construction, and that's really a way to reduce the total amount of time that there's disruption from the bridge construction, the total amount of time that there'd be traffic delays. But with this overnight construction, it could exceed the noise standards, and it could could result in a substantial increase in the noise during that overnight construction during the active periods of construction. The environmental document does include a mitigation measure, and that would minimize the amount of construction overnight. It would also prohibit the noisiest types of construction, things like jackhammering and pile driving. It would prohibit those from happening overnight, and include some other construction best practices. But even with all those noise reduction measures, it would still likely result in a substantial increase in nighttime noise for the nearby residents during those active periods of construction. And so this is another impact that was considered significant and unavoidable. I do want to mention, related to the bridge construction, the environmental document and the project proposal would maintain emergency access through that area. I know that's a question that's come up before. So there would be an evacuation route and emergency access during construction, even though there may be disruptions for other types of traffic. Next slide, please. And then there's one other significant impact that cannot be mitigated. And this one only applies to the boating pier in alternative one. So it doesn't apply to the preferred alternative. But this impact has to do with the scenic impact of placing a new pier where there's no existing pier. And Meeks Bay is a TRPA designated scenic recreation site. And so there's a quantitative way of evaluating scenic impacts. And it's a very sensitive site. And there's really no way to offset the visual change with having a pier in the middle of the bay where there isn't currently one. And so this image is a simulation of that 300-foot boating pier with the emergency services boat on the end. And this is taken from the north end of the beach and the resort looking south. And again, with no way to really mitigate that pier, while still serving the intent of alternative one, which is to have a pier that's long enough to provide boat access during different lake levels and can accommodate emergency services boat, then there's really no way to do that without having the scenic impact. Next slide. So that is the summary of the environmental document findings. And now I'll turn it over to Ashley to talk about how to provide comments.
Thanks, Adam. All right, you can go to the next slide here. You know what? Actually, we'll go back one before everybody gets excited about the actual form in there. I'll just mention briefly again what Austin mentioned at the top of this webinar here, that you know, the comments provided today, you know, during the webinar, during the chat, etc., we will take those comments and we will certainly, you know, take the comments and incorporate them into the comments that we've received for this project. But in order to have actual standing from a NEPA standpoint, in order to object on the project, you have to have commented during a public comment period, in one of the official ways that you're allowed to comment. So what I'm going to show you is how you can comment online on our online form. And it's really pretty quick and easy. So now we can go to the next slide here. And there is a link in the environmental document. I think we're going to put it up in the chat. I think it's on the meeksbayproject.org. On all of the websites, basically, there's a link to the page, to the comment page. And so this is what it looks like here. And there's, of course, all the space for all your name and information like that. If you want to have standing on the project, you do need to provide that information there. Please provide it in the spaces, in the actual boxes where it asks you, and not in the comment box. All of the comments that are submitted are essentially, you know, public information. But in order to publish things on, you know, a website or for people to be able to see comments, we have to redact all of that personally identifiable information. That's the PII that goes in that box there in your actual comment. So just keep your name and everything up in the little individual boxes, and then just provide your comment in the actual comment box. And we're also requesting that everyone actually you can either cut and paste it from, you know, Word and email document. If you want to type it out somewhere else first, you know, you can or you can type it right into the text box, either one. But please do actually put the comments in the text box. And I'll tell you why, because we have an actual sort of comment database that we use to analyze all these comments, and we can group comments together, etc. It's kind of it's a pretty slick system. It actually works pretty good, but all of the actual comments need to be in the actual comment box. So if you provide an attachment, it's going to be me or one of a couple other people who are going in there, opening up your attachment, cutting and pasting it into the actual text box there. So the best way to get, you know, your comments the way you want them, without any possible transcription errors, etc., is to actually put your comment in the text box. And if you want, you can provide an attachment, which is just a copy of your comments. If you do absolutely need to provide an attachment, Word documents are best, just because of the ability to cut and paste from a PDF. It's pretty limited, even if you export it to a Word document first. So again, just kind of comes back to how much effort, you know, it takes us to get your comments in there, and just adding more errors in, etc. So Let's go to the next slide here. All right, so when you're commenting on an environmental document, we have a couple of helpful hints to make your comments, the best comments that you can provide that are the most useful for us in being able to provide comments on the document and for us to be able to either make changes or make additions, or for us to be able to synthesize your comments. It helps if you follow some of these tips here. So if you have, well, let me say this, if you, with this system here, if you, provide comments and you're thinking and you're like, I really have more comments to submit, you're welcome to submit as many comments as you would like. What I would say is that, if you provide the same comment 10 times, it's really just going to kind of count as you providing that comment one time. But if you're welcome to, if you want to take it in some smaller chunks, I know it's a big document to provide comments on, just a certain section, provide that comment, come back to it a little while later, provide comments on other sections, that's fine. You don't have to provide it all in one. And another thing that's very helpful for you to comment on is if you feel the information we have provided in the document is inaccurate, if you think that the methodology that we have used is not correct, or there's a better methodology, or the assumptions that we're making are incorrect, etc., please comment on that. And it's always best if you can cite directly from the document, and there's page numbers, there's section numbers, etc. Do what you can. You can cut and paste, particular sections that you are referencing. Do what you can to help us to understand which section you're referencing, because you'll be surprised how many times I go to look at a comment and it's very vague and it's just sort of saying I do or do not agree with this, and it's really, I can't even tell which section of the document it's actually commenting on. So that specificity really helps us. And if there's new information that's out there that we have not considered, please help us to learn about that. And then solution oriented always helps. If you have a proposal for what you think could be a better, either part of an alternative, or if you think specific parts of an alternative are better, if there's a mitigation that might reduce an impact, all of those things are also helpful. And then if you do provide any external sources, please just let us know what those are so that we can take a look at those and consider your comments as such. And I think those are the two slides that I have.
Yes, correct. Thank you, Rebecca, Ashley, and Adam for the comprehensive presentation. I'd like to take the remaining up to 20 minutes that we have tonight and address any questions that folks have. So if you want to speak, please raise your hand and we'll call on you. And in the meantime, I will follow up with Ashley's presentation with a direct question about the comments. And the person asked, will we be able to see the comments others have provided?
Yeah, we have in the past opened up what's called a public reading room. However, we have had some projects where folks were using sort of the information that was provided in that public reading room and then essentially harassing people for their comments that they made on the project. So we here on the Basin no longer provide a public reading room, which is kind of a live thing where if somebody puts in a comment, then it's immediately everyone can see it. However, all of the comments are publicly available. And it's possible that at the end we may go through, depending upon how many comments are received, and go through the exercise of redacting all the public information and then posting to the website. Or it may be that we take sort of representative comments for certain issues and post those then, with what our response was. So that's going to kind of depend upon how many comments are received. So in summary, we don't have a live active reading room, but any of your comments are publicly available and will most likely end up in some form or another on a website, minus personally identifiable information.
May I clarify that in the final environmental document, I believe there will be response to the substantive comments that were made on the draft. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. There are varying ways that we can do that though, and it's not necessarily sort of, this person's letter is posted there with all the responses. We can do it that way. And again, it kind of depends on how many comments we receive, how we end up going about that. All of the comments will be responded to.
Okay, thank you. No hands are up at the moment, so I'll go to the other questions in the Q&A. Another gentleman asked, how long will construction last?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And it kind of depends upon which part of the project you're thinking about. There's sort of the larger restoration piece, and then there are the recreation pieces, as well as the bridge. The bridge would be done in a season, essentially, within a year. That one's going to get started and finished in sort of the most expeditious way possible. The remaining parts of the project, like the restoration work, that is usually a multi-year process. The first year you come in, sort of the year before you come in and you remove the vegetation, and then you come in the next season, you do the majority of your restoration work. For a site like this, we would be able to get, the majority of the restoration work completed in one season. And then you generally come through sort of on the third and fourth years and kind of do a little cleanup as needed. And then the recreation pieces, depending upon exactly how and when funding comes in for some of those pieces, all of the actual work itself could be completed in a season or two. It just kind of depends, like I said, on sometimes we opt to have it take longer so that it impacts the season less. So it kind of depends upon how that order of operations goes.
Right. Speaking to the extent of the environmental analysis, quite a few questions from one person regarding mosquitoes and the potential for bear and wildlife introduction to the project area. Specific question is, were those topics analyzed in the environmental document? And if not, why not?
Yeah, and I'd encourage that commenter to do a careful read through of the document and submit formal comments. I see in the chat there's quite a few detailed comments, so definitely submit those, and we can provide a more detailed response in the final environmental document. But generally, there's not expected to be an impact related to mosquitoes or to bears, as everyone in Tahoe knows. The bears don't really, they'll go anywhere. They'll walk through neighborhoods. They're what's called a habitat generalist, and that they'll go down to the campground today, or with or without the project. There's not really any aspect of the restoration that's going to attract bears. The things that would attract them would be trash or food sources, and there's no proposed changes to that sort of thing. So no expectation to be more or less bears in the area. And the same with mosquitoes. They lay their eggs in standing water. There's standing water there today, and there'll be standing water after the restoration. The restoration isn't expected to create more, pools of standing water. It's grading the bed and it affects the depth and the vegetation type growing there, but and no reason to believe there'll be substantially more mosquitoes with the restoration.
Okay. Hey, Adam, can I just add in really quickly on the bears as well? The project also does include a wildlife undercrossing. Usually the bears don't have a problem in that location, but sometimes the cubs do. As an interesting note, that's the reason why there's a hole in the fence near the campground, so that there was a way for the bears to get through and not create a barrier. so that they would have to then go further through the campground to get around. And then related to the mosquitoes as well, you can kind of see from, if you go back in the slides, if you get a chance to go back and take a look at the aerials and the amount from like the 1950s versus now, the amount of standing water, the pools, et cetera, is much less than a lagoon ecosystem. And for the most part, or for a lot of the year, it would really just be a creek. It wouldn't have a substantial backwater wetland for a lot of the year, especially once it starts to dry out, just like the Taylor Tlack, et cetera.
Yeah, and for those that are interested in more information on this project, you'll see the website there on the slide, and we have also posted it in the chat. I encourage everyone to take a look. All the material up to this date is posted there, and we will have this recording from tonight, as well as a written response to the questions that have been posted onto the website as soon as possible. So that's a real resource for folks who want to learn more. There's a couple questions relative to the criteria around the determining what's historic or not, and specifically around the cabins. So could you speak to the analysis that was done there, and what is the criteria that was used to evaluate whether or not something is a historic structure?
Well, I'd encourage the commenter again to do a careful read through of the cultural resources section of the environmental document for more details, but we did evaluate all the structures out there. There was an architectural historian that went out on site and evaluated the cabins and the various different elements, the buildings and the fences and everything that's out there. And there's set criteria that are used by the State Historic Preservation Office to evaluate whether something qualifies as a historic resource. I believe in this case, the Meeks Bay Resort District as a whole, so that when you look at all the buildings together, was considered a historic resource, but those motel style cabins were not what they call a contributing feature. They weren't, those cabins themselves weren't historic, weren't contributing to the historic value of the resort as a whole. But again, take a careful read through that section. And if you have more comments or questions on that, definitely provide those as written comments.
Okay.
Also, those buildings, the simplest answer is that they're all not old enough. And then in addition, when they were constructed, they were not constructed essentially in conformity with the rest of the resort, in order that then they might have still be considered a contributing element. And so it's the age and essentially the construction type that makes it not meet the historic qualifications.
Right. And again, the environmental document goes into some depth on each topic that's analyzed. So for folks that are interested in any one of these particular matters, as been suggested, review the relevant chapter, and you'll get some background and context for what laws and regulations applied and were used in the analysis. Again, if anyone wants to speak, please raise your hand. We have a few minutes left this evening. And I also encourage people to review the chat. And if you're not able to get to that because you're on a phone, totally understandable. It's hard to read. I want to reiterate that we will prepare a summary of the presentation tonight and all of the questions that were raised, and we'll get that up on the project website as soon as possible. So if you want to come back when you have access to a computer and review the dialogue there, that'll be really helpful. Okay. So with that, it looks like I'm just reviewing the Q&A, and we've spoken to the questions that have been raised so far. There is some more interest in this historic significance criteria, and so I'll just direct that commenter to the document. Please review it in depth, and then raise questions if you have them, or specific feedback in a comment. Are there any, oh good, we'll go back to Clay. I see your hand up.
Hi, this is Roberta Freeberg again. I already asked a question, so I'm not sure, am I allowed to ask?
Yes, of
another
course, please,
question?
please, what?
So I've been really trying to go over the entire EIR draft document, and it is extremely thorough and extremely detailed. But I was a little surprised under public safety and hazard. It states that conflict between boaters and swimmers is mitigated to a less significant impact because of the no wake zone. However, we all know many boaters don't go the speed limit, and actually many enter into the swim area at Meeks Bay. I've witnessed many injuries at Meeks Bay over the years due to boaters not abiding by the rules. So my question is, and I'm sure it's in the document somewhere, but does the document include analysis based on sheriff and emergency calls over the years? How did the consultants conclude that all the swimmers and no non-motorized boaters are safe because everyone's going to follow the no wake zone? End of
Yes.
question.
Okay,
Yeah, and-
thank you, Roberta. Adam?
Yeah, and I can start with that one. Really what the environmental document does, it looks at how the project would change the conditions. So if you've got boats out there now and swimmers and there's a conflict, it looks at whether any of these alternatives would make that better or worse. And in this case, all of the action alternatives would reduce the amount of boating and swimming in the same area. Now the alternative one with the pier would allow some, it would have a pier that would attract some motorized boat use, and the recreation, the public safety section of the environmental document talk about that and how conflicts would be managed. But essentially it's looking at, would these alternatives make things better or worse than they are today? Recognizing that there's always some potential for conflicts when you have swimmers and power boats in the same general area.
Okay. Owen Hughes, you have your hand up. You'll have to come off mute. We cannot hear you.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, I have a question regarding the EIS. I've been through it quite thoroughly. It's got a lot of impact of cookie cutter type things like ospreys, but nothing in terms of mosquitoes, bears, ticks. It doesn't actually talk to or quantitate the actual problems people are going to face in that area because of this project.
Okay. Well, I encourage you to provide a written comment through the website as Ashley has provided, and specify your concerns in that point.
Yeah, but not one mention of bears, one mention of mosquitoes, only saying that, oh yeah, they do seem to carry diseases, and no mentions of ticks. So I don't know.
Okay.
Seems a little lopsided, and any objections were actually straw man meant to prop up this project.
Okay, well, thank you for your opinion, and I hope you'll submit a written comment as directed. So with that, I want to ask, are there any other specific questions for the panelists? Okay, I see one last question came in here on the Q&A. Let me take a look at it. If the preferred alternative is selected, can you put a buoy line from Kellett Point, where the house is, to the southeast boundary line of the Forest Service property in Meeks Bay?
So I'll start out answering this one, Kirk. The swim area boundaries is something that gets worked out, and there's an official thing with the Coast Guard. It's not currently set up that way. In theory, if the preferred alternative was chosen, that is something that could be done. There would have to be some space left, sort of on the edges, if you will, for folks to be able to use to launch kayaks. Technically, within a swim beach, a designated swim beach, any paddle craft, or excuse me, any watercraft, including paddlecraft, is not allowed to launch from the swim area. So there would have to be some areas on the side where those uses could be allowed. But in theory, that is something that could be accomplished under that alternative.
Okay. All right. Well, we have a couple minutes left here. Time for one final question, if anyone has one. Appreciate everyone coming out here at the end of a day to learn more about this project. And I want to reiterate that the materials are on the project website, including the full environmental document, as well as instructions on how to comment effectively on this project. And so any of you who are interested in learning more, please visit that site. And there is an email address there if you have any problems or challenges with accessing the document or questions about how to comment. Please use the email to submit your questions, and we'll get back to you. We will also post all the written material from tonight, as well as responses to the questions that are raised tonight, as soon as we can get the transcript here and get that written up. So thank you all. And
Hey, Austin, can I just
Yeah.
double check something?
yeah, of
I
course.
saw that I saw that in the chat you had put in the link for the comment, but I'm not sure that the folks on the webinar can see the chat. So I just wanted to make sure that
Yeah, well, there's a couple.
maybe.
Okay, if you go to the project website, there's definitely a link there to the document as well as how to comment. So if you're not seeing the chat, Kirk reports that he can see it. I did select that everyone should be able to see my response. So thank you,
Okay.
Kirk, for addressing that. But I thank you, Ashley, because all the directions, including the comment database that Ashley mentions, is accessible from the meeksbayproject.org website, as well as on the TRPA website and the Forest Service website. So all the project partners have links from their respective sites. So there's plenty of ways to get the material and address. So the last question, how many attendees to this presentation? At its high point, we had 44 total participants, and it's 26 right now. So it was pretty solidly right around 40 during the Q&A. So pretty good turnout. I appreciate everyone being here, and it's 7 o'clock on the button. So I say we close out the evening and let everyone get on with their dinner plans. So thank you very much for attending, and we wish you all well.
Thank you.
Thank you.